What does the Cyprus problem cost Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots? How have Cypriots on both sides of the island paid for the Cyprus problem? Let's take a look. Many years ago, maybe in 2006, I approached the UN with an idea to try and calculate the cost to the economy of a divided Cyprus. The boss at the time, Michael Muller, encouraged me to think instead about making it more positive, to make it about the benefits, not the costs. To cut a long story short, in 2008, that culminated in the publication of the first of the day after reports with Praxoula Antoniadou Kyriakou and Özlem Oğuz. I think this broke a taboo because it was the first time that Greek Cypriots had heard that a solution of the Cyprus problem might actually be good for the economy. It was published just days after Dimitris Christofias got elected, and because there was a pro-solution leader in the north, Mehmet Ali Talat, there was a lot of hope about putting the country back together again. In 2009, we looked at how you would fund the solution of the Cyprus settlement in a sustainable manner. And in 2010, we looked at the peace dividend for Turkey and Greece. And I apologise because I've got the wrong image here, but it's very late at night and I'm not going to change it now. Then in 2014, I got two academics on board to take a different approach, where we produced what we called Revisiting the Cyprus Peace Dividend. And then the final one, published in February 2020, right before the COVID lockdown, was called Delivering the Cyprus Peace Dividend. This included low, medium and high forecasts. It included Monte Carlo simulations to test how robust the forecast was. There was a focus on gender and lots of other recommendations of things to put in place to ensure that you could make the peace dividend as big as possible and address any potential losers. We also had 4 pretty infographics in 3 languages. We had 3 videos in 3 languages. And you can download them all here in the About Us section of the Sapientia Economics website. It was a massive undertaking, and to be honest, that is why I haven't approached it since. But it does give us something of an answer to what is the cost of division, because in many ways, the amount you can make with a solution is also the same as the amount you're losing without a solution. I'll get back to that in a moment. But first, let me look at some other clear costs of division, and let me start with the Turkish Cypriots. One clear loss is inflation. In 2002, we had in the south what we thought was pretty painful inflation of about 8.1%. But in the north, the inflation rate hit 99.7%. Incidentally, this is also why we now see an increase in the number of Turkish Cypriots crossing south and a decrease in the number of Greek Cypriots crossing north, because prices of basically everything except fuel are now higher in the north than in the south. And just to emphasise, the difference in inflation wasn't just 1 year, it's on average been quite a big difference. This is because northern Cyprus uses the Turkish lira, which weakens all the time, and that puts up your input prices. So while the average 10-year inflation rate in the south was just 1.4% from 2015 to 2014, it was 16.3% in the northern part of the island. So Turkish Cypriots pay through inflation, and high inflation holds back economic growth rates. The average real GDP growth rate in the south in 2015 to 2024, despite COVID, despite 2015 being the tail end of the financial crisis on this side, was 4.9%. In the north, despite having very strong population growth, which normally boosts your economic growth, the average was only 3.1%. What this translates into is lower GDP per person, essentially lower incomes. Now you might say, oh, I heard that the minimum wage in northern Cyprus is now higher than it is in the south. That's true, but a far, far higher proportion of workers in the north get paid only the minimum wage. So this is why you see this difference, okay? So on average, people in northern Cyprus are not as well off as they are in the south. Now, on top of that, you can see that Turkish Cypriot independence, or economic agency, if you like, is weakening over time because Turkey is an ever larger share of trade. It's also 80% of tourists and about half of all foreign students. And this is all a byproduct of a court case in 1994 that essentially blocked direct trade with northern Cyprus, okay? And there are also other issues. The average length of stay of tourism in northern Cyprus is only about 3 days, compared with about 9 days in the south. What does this mean? It means casino tourism, people staying in hotels, gambling all weekend, and not going out to spend money in restaurants and shops. So it's not really benefiting the wider economy. Now let's have a look at the costs for the Greek Cypriots. It's a bit more subtle and not so easy to quantify, but I think the really obvious one is the impact on electricity prices. Let me explain. So let's start with the fact that natural gas, which we don't have any of at the moment, is much cheaper than diesel or mazout. At the moment, about 75% of electricity consumption is diesel and mazout, heavy fuel oil. Forget how much solar energy is being produced, it's how much is actually consumed that matters, okay? And as we can see from this article by Charles Elinas, who writes frequently in lots of different newspapers about the energy issue, natural gas is cheaper because if we had natural gas, we would pay less for emissions. Gas is less dirty than diesel and mazut and is also just generally cheaper, okay? Now, Cyprus has discovered some natural gas, but somehow it's never been produced. Everybody else discovers gas and goes on to produce it. You can see here Israel, Egypt, but not in Cyprus. Every year we find out that all those promises of producing gas next year have not come to pass. So Aphrodite was discovered in 2011. 14 years later, it's still in the ground. Now, yes, Chevron is undertaking studies at the moment, but we still don't know for sure if it's really going to put money into actually getting it out of the ground. And as I mentioned in another video, ENI was supposed to submit its development plan for Kronos earlier this year in Block 6, and it looks like that hasn't happened either. So my conclusion of all this is that the Cyprus problem gets in the way of getting the gas out of the ground and onto the market quickly. And the Cyprus problem is also very clearly stalling the Great Sea Interconnector, as you will know if you've looked at all of the rows going on between Greece and Cyprus about it. And this means that we can't draw on cheaper energy sources. We're an energy island stuck without expensive diesel and expensive mazut. And the reason why I think gas is also being affected by the Cyprus problem is what Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the other week at the UN General Assembly. He said basically that anything you do in the Eastern Mediterranean, if you try to leave out Turkey, Turkey's going to stop it. Now, I'm not saying that that is anything I'm going to defend, but this is the realpolitik that we are now dealing with. We're dealing with an era of strong men where, as it were, might is right. So without a solution of the Cyprus problem, you're probably not going to get gas out of the ground. You're not going to have an interconnector. So you'll stay with the highest electricity prices in the EU, at least for medium-sized businesses. It's not the highest for households, but it is the highest for businesses. There's also a case to be made that the Cyprus problem decreases the independence or sovereignty, if you like, of Greek Cypriots because of increasing dependence on Greece. Greece is increasingly visible in retail, in the banking sector, in the coffee chains, etc. Why is that? It's because basically Greece doesn't have a competitor here. Normally, your biggest trading partner is the big country next door. That big country next door for Greek Cypriots is Turkey, and there's no trade with Turkey. So you can see it's not a straight line, but there's a general trend upwards of more and more trade, especially on the import side, with Greece. And lack of competition tends to put upward pressure on prices. And a final and somewhat intangible cost of the Cyprus problem, it's a byproduct of the fact that the vice president position is vacant. It means, and academics have written papers on this, it means that the Republic of Cyprus president is pretty powerful compared with most leaders in the rest of the world. And one unfortunate byproduct of that is that there are fewer checks and balances. And I think we've all seen what that turns into when we had the project for importing liquefied natural gas, which would have cut our electricity prices. It's under criminal investigation by the EU. The Great Sea Interconnector is also under criminal investigation. So I'm not saying that corruption would disappear entirely if you unite Cyprus, but at least you would remove a structural element that makes it more likely, okay? Now, back to our peace dividend. What did we find back in 2020? We found that GDP could be up to 1.4 times higher with a solution than without one. It could be up to about 17 billion higher, which at today's prices is about 20 billion. And growth rates would be about 1.8 percentage points higher, which is quite a lot when it accumulates over a number of years. And importantly for Turkish Cypriots, their incomes would shift far closer to Greek Cypriot ones, right? So in sum then, the cost of a divided Cyprus in northern Cyprus is high inflation, leading to low growth, low incomes per capita, and weakening independence because of higher and higher dependence on Turkey. In the south, the cost is energy isolation, which leads to high electricity prices, and to a certain extent, some increasing dependence on Greece, as well as the corruption issue I mentioned, which somehow I forgot to put in this slide. The peace dividend itself could be up to about 17 billion at 2020 prices. At today's prices, that's just over 20 billion euros. So I know there are a lot of skeptics out there, but we still need to try. In the words of my friend Meltem Onurkan Samani, who was talking about the late Katie Kliridis, she said Katie had reminded her that in the end, we are destined to reach peaceful coexistence because there is no other future for this island. That's it from me. As you can see, I'm a walking, talking geek on Cyprus. Go to sapientaeconomics.com to find out products and services. Some are free, some are very cheap, and some are a lot more expensive. Thank you for listening.